So, Tessa, have you had any experiences where you attempt to make data available and accessible and share it with the wider organisation where people object to that and feel uncomfortable or unhappy with that data becoming publicly available?
Yes. So the whole reason I left industry and started my own company was to promote this kind of notion of ethical accounting and ethical finance, where even if the truth hurts, it's the truth, and actually by displaying the truth, it will empower people and motivate people to make improvements. But by denying the fact, we're not helping anyone. Then we have cases like Carillion who just take a dive, and people, we didn't see it coming, but they clearly did. They were just trying to hide it and not listening to the data that was there in front of them.
It's a really good example, and I think myself and Tom have also seen kind of instances in organisations where people, and sometimes it's due to a lack of trust in those numbers. So I think ensuring that the numbers are accurate and trusted is really important, because only then should you be sharing, I guess, because otherwise decisions on the flip side, I guess, decisions can be made off the back of data that isn't accurate or of a high quality. But at the same time, yeah, you're absolutely right. It's that transparency that really drives actions and behaviours.
Yeah, I think when I've seen it, it's all been around change, kind of the fear of change. So kind of working on a global program, you had certain markets which wouldn't want to show their data because they weren't adopting new business processes and things like that. So they would be kind of claiming, well, we can't compare our numbers because we do this a completely different way. And the whole point of the program was to help standardise that. So there certainly was a big fear about actually putting our numbers against the numbers from other markets because we'll look bad. But ultimately, that was the point of the reporting, was to highlight exactly those problems. So
Yeah.
I think not really wanting to embrace change is quite often been a key point in that unwillingness to actually report the numbers properly.
Definitely. And when it starts from the top as well, that culture of almost like the blame game, like people will be blamed for reporting the truth,
Yes.
rather than looking into the future. What can we do now? That is what it is. I think it's rife, and the integrity of the data is a great point. It's really important to make sure you test various relevant scenarios in any company that you work in, to ensure the integrity of that data.
The blame thing is a really interesting point, because I guess that's maybe slightly company specific. Some companies that may be more open, their actual ability to report data freely and then start seeing where there might be inconsistencies and things in the way data is collected, it's probably a lot easier than maybe in a company where you will get punished if your targets aren't being hit, you're massively different from other markets. It's also probably a company culture kind of thing which massively impacts the data.
Well, that's a great point actually, because then that kind of leads on to things like sales, commission, and where people are paid for their performance. Then obviously there's an incentive to not want to report necessarily the whole truth, because they won't reap the reward.
Yeah, I've seen that in organisations where those kind of bonus structures, and particularly the culture, it really does drive those behaviours of not sharing, and actually it results in a real lack of transparency across the organisation. And I think Simon Sinek and other guys have talked a lot. Ray Dalio talks about radical transparency, and I think there feels like there is a movement to embrace mistakes or embrace the sharing and transparency of information so that we can improve. But it is very, very hard in some of the big organisations and big corporates, particularly where there are these sort of your bonus structures or reward systems that don't always drive the best behaviours, I guess.
Yeah, and this is probably where we talk about kind of data-driven culture, how do you as a company move towards being a data-driven company? I think that kind of comes into it. It's, what's your culture? How do you reward people actually trying to show the right data and having that transparency? It kind of all comes into everything really. Commission targets.
Yeah, I guess it's just really important you use the data in the right way. So rather than use it to punish people, you use it to drive improvement. So you communicate it in a very positive light, rather than we can see the data now. You've not hit your numbers. That's not good enough.
Yeah.
It's got to be communicated really positively. And I think culture and data, they're really important. They're kind of intertwined. I think a lot of data initiatives and projects fail because we haven't communicated the objectives properly and articulated the benefits of making data transparent, making it accessible, sharing it across the organisation, and these cultures of fear, they really drive better performance from what I've seen. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really good point. And there was a CFO I worked with at a previous company who worked with various companies. She'd had a really great career, and she said the companies that actually perform the best, who are owned by private equity firms who have really harsh targets, are the ones who are actually honest.
Yeah.
And then the private equity firms will help them to grow, because that's what they want. They want to make a profit, so they're not going to let you collapse. They're going to help you with your strategy and improving your current performance. So I think honesty is the best policy.
Fantastic, and that moves on nicely into the next question around ethics. Obviously, you mentioned you focus on ethical accounting practices, working with ethical businesses. So what is it that where's the line? What do you mean by sort of ethical accountancy, and how do you operate?
Yeah, it's hard to explain because ethics is so subjective. So it will vary from person to person. But it's really about the openness and the transparency, but also ensuring that we're not abusing people's data, and it's used in the right way. So even like the not punishing but improving, so where there's weakness, there's opportunity. But yeah, the transparency piece is where I really focus, and also being fussy on what clients I work with. So again, subjective, but I don't work with any unethical companies, so who could potentially be seen to have unethical practices or unethical products, for example. So trying to work with really progressive, sustainable organisations.
Sure, and I think we've spoken a lot about sustainability. We were talking about that recently, and I think, again, we come back to data. Data can help organisations drive their sustainable goals as well. So historically, I've always thought of data as either helping you increase your revenue, reduce your cost, or reduce your risk. But actually, there's a kind of a fourth element that's really sort of come into my mind recently, which is actually it can really help you drive your sustainable goals and objectives as well. So reducing or offsetting carbon emissions, so actually tracking and capturing how much CO2 your organisation is responsible for, and those kind of areas are really interesting. And I actually think moving forward, ethical business is going to be good business. I think companies want to be seen to be doing the right thing now.
Yeah, and I think customers are waking up to this, and obviously social media really helps with promoting these positive messages of sustainability. So customers are becoming more fussy with who they deal with based on company practices. Yes, I think it's a great sort of area for companies to concentrate on.
In terms of kind of ethical finance, is there kind of specific finance movements or finance practices which are deemed to be kind of unethical, and conversely things which are particularly ethical?
Yeah, we are governed by our professional bodies, by ethical principles as professionals, but they kind of leak into businesses as well. and one of the areas is around like competency and integrity, which I think can only be enhanced by data and automation and AI, because there's no arguing with what it's producing. But yeah, the piece that's really important to me in my company and that I push on to my staff is the competency, so knowing your limits. And it's so vast. Even tax as a subject and data as a subject is so vast. People get worried that they don't know everything. But it's an impossibility. So it's just understanding where your competency in a subject ends.
Yeah, I suppose that's the case for kind of all lines of business. It's really the same thing when people ask us, you guys data scientists and all this sort of stuff. Well, it can be easy to try and say, that's we kind of cover data science as well, things like that. But actually knowing what your specialisms are, I think it's quite important to making sure you deliver a proper service to your clients.
Definitely, and having that network as well of other people who complement what you do. Like, I don't pretend to be a system developer or able to code. I understand it and I can work with those people, but I'm not going to pretend that is a service that I personally